I'm going to ask two questions, but you know, Tom, when you talked about the couch and the TV being the alternative, the alternatives that really perplex me and make me worry are fishing at the trout farm and surfing on the wave machine. You know, that's a much easier step for some of us as environmental conditions get degraded. But that's just an observation. When I mentioned that recreational fishing was cross-cutting, and I was talking about the 19 million Americans you were talking about, and I'd like the panelists here, including Pete, representing Surfrider, to just say a little bit about how wealth, industry, and anger influence the people who participate in your organizations, and to what degree it makes your work less representative of the whole, and does that cause its own policy challenges? So, Pete.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. How wealth?
Well, so Surfrider doesn't represent all surfers. Mm-hmm. Tom's group doesn't represent all anglers, right? Mm-hmm. And nor does Dan's, and even working with paddlers. And what I tend to see is that you have strong representation by industry groups sometimes, and certain kinds of groups, wealthy participants, and then sometimes just really angry participants. Mm-hmm. And as someone who participates in a lot of ocean sports myself, I look at positions that groups will take and I'll go, gosh, that doesn't reflect my feelings at all. And so to what degree have you found that to be the case, and how do you deal with that?
So that's an interesting question for Surfrider Foundation. Surfrider is an environmental organization whose membership is heavily comprised of surfers and other recreational users. And so folks will sometimes make the point, well, you're an environmental group, and so is every surfer an environmentalist? And I would say no, not every surfer is an environmentalist. I've met a few who are not, and have shared their thoughts with me. But what I would bring it back to is I look at Surfrider's mission, sort of the core areas that we work on, and there are issues like water quality, issues like beach access, issues like ocean health, and to me, all four of those areas, the fourth being shoreline protection, all of those things relate back to sort of the use and enjoyment of the ocean. So maybe I'm biased, but you know, I do have some trouble looking at someone who uses and enjoys the resource and values the opportunity to, say, go surfing, and yet sort of doesn't subscribe to some of those positions that would actually help enable that use for current and the future.
Margo?
Well, it's almost like it doesn't quite really apply to ocean paddlers. I mean, they are not a unified force. But we've seen some organizations like the American Canoe Association has been very proactive with working with Waterkeepers Alliance, I believe, and a few others for freshwater interests. But so far, as a cohesive unit to fight for access on the ocean or even in the bays, it's just, you know, and other than just like casual cleanups, we really don't have that, at least not in New Jersey. In fact, there's one organization, it's a huge organization of guys who and women who paddle on the bays. If they do anything environmentally related, it's always pickups and beach trash pickups, and they don't really get into the dialogue of conservation or any policy issues. They actually try to avoid that.
We have a really interesting dynamic in recreational fishing. I think, as I started out before, that for the longest time, going back to the time of Teddy Roosevelt, we really were the leading edge of conservation in the United States. And I think a lot of it's still in freshwater, but have lost a lot of that in saltwater. And I'm not sure that it's lost, and it's really difficult. There are 30 million anglers fresh and saltwater in the United States, 2 million in California, and clearly no one speaks for all of them, and I'm not sure, I am sure that no one really speaks for the majority of them. Like most recreational sports, this is our passion. This is what we love to do. We love to get out in the water and get a line in there. And, you know, after you've done it for a while, catching a fish isn't a really big thing. It's just getting out there. We have an industry that sits apart from us. And there are actually two industries. In marine fishing, you've got people that take people fishing. And this is predominantly the charter boat captains and the party boats. And, you know, they're really focused on that. And in California, we call them commercial passenger fishing vessels, CPFVs. And, you know, the first word there is commercial, all right? And yet they hold the flag of recreational fishing, and they're the ones they're fighting for your rights. And it's like, I'm not sure that the commercial element should be the ones fighting for our rights. We do an awful lot of work going out to local fishing clubs. And when you talk to local fishing clubs, it's interesting. They all want to go fishing. They all want to go out there. They want an abundant ocean. It's incredible how very conservation-oriented folks are. You know, again, we walk in with a conservation plan, so it makes it very easy to agree with that. But the thing is, it is amazing how well-oriented, conservation-oriented, and very thoughtful the vast majority of folks that I run into are. You know, I can go back through the days, and you know, I represented recreational fishermen on the early Channel Islands when, and this is back in the 90s, when I mean, it went from a process that we got into one of incredible vehemence on both sides. But you know, I can remember at one point thinking, God, I'm going to get run out of here at best. And there were about 60 fishermen in a room. This was in Santa Barbara, which was ground zero of the Channel Islands. And I said, okay, hey, look, here's the deal. I mean, they're going to be no-take marine reserves out there. How many people in the room can't live with any reserves? You know, if we find out that, you know, if you deal with that, it's like, how do you structure it afterwards? And I mean, I honestly didn't have the slightest idea how this outcome's going to come out. You know, it's like one of these, always know the answer before you ask a question. This wasn't the case. And it's like, okay, all right, here's the deal. This is it. How many of you can't live with that? And I said, no, come on, really, put your hands up. I mean, it was a room, the room was a quarter the size of this with this many or more people in it. I said, no, seriously, put your hands up. And after about a minute or two, 2 hands went up in the back of the room. And this is like 65 people. And you start doing the math on that, it was very clear to me, and we had done a lot of work at United Anglers of Southern California afterwards, and sat down and did surveys. And they weren't statistically valid, but we did, I mean, there were over 500 surveys returned. So it was a pretty good idea of fishermen in Southern California. There we ran between about 85% people that said, yeah, hey, look, no-take reserves are okay, make them workable. But like I said, that was one of the things that dramatically changed my outlook on it's like, okay, how do we, it went from going, okay, how do we, instead of opposing this, how do you start managing where you're going to go? Getting back to your question, there is no real firm leadership, and I'm not sure in any recreational segment. We're communities, okay? This isn't an industry. If you talk to commercial fishing, they've got a vested financial interest that it goes one way down the line, okay? And they decide on that way. But with recreational fishing, or I suspect with most other recreational, I don't want to talk for them, it's our passion. And the thing is, it's really clear when you start taking a look around the passion of folks at large, that conservation is a big part of what we do. Anglers are no different.
Well, listening to everybody speak, and I was thinking about the sailing community, and really, you talk to them, everybody in the sailing community has other passions in their life, and so many of the sailors out there are surfers, or they're fishermen, or they go out paddling, which I happen to do. So you see that their use and their activity level and their time spent is way beyond sailing, and so that also speaks to the breadth and depth, if you will, of our audience that we're trying to speak to as a new organization, reaching this constituency. So our messaging has been very broad, and I think you were honing in on that aspect, and we have not taken the route of early Surfrider, if you will. And that's by design, to have a very broad-based appeal and to do a lot of education messaging to our community and the different constituents within it, so that we can hopefully raise the level of awareness for everybody. But what we do on the back end of that broad messaging has been to allow multiple specific actions that an individual or an organization can take that'll have a meaningful difference, because we recognize that people are all over the board, both with their passion for sailing, but also for their politics and their time and ability to contribute. So we have broad messages with some very specific actions tied to that in each of our type programs.
The other thing I asked you briefly to think about, and that I want to bring up here too, is we often talk about the fact that recreational interests are not adequately represented in a lot of coastal and ocean policy. And really, outside of recreational fishing, there's no clear advocate for you in the federal government for a lot of recreational interests. Can you just describe one major challenge that you've had that has made it difficult to participate in a policy process, and whether it's within your membership or in the process itself, or something that really has sort of left you feeling, gosh, I feel like we're underrepresented, and just provide an idea of what you might have done if you were capable of fixing that problem.
So one challenge we talk about a lot within Surfrider is the reactive versus proactive issue. And I'd explain that by saying that if you have an issue where there's a horrible coastal development project, or there's raw sewage pouring into the ocean, activists will organize themselves. Surfers and other citizens will come out of the woodwork. All you have to do is get the information out there, and they'll want to engage. They'll want to advocate. And so my role as a staff member or organizer is simply to try and support them and help them be effective in their campaign. But we all know, folks that work on environmental issues, we're not going to win the war by reacting to things. The only way that we're going to be effective is being proactive. And so when you have a planning process, whether it's marine protected areas, whether it's marine spatial planning, or even updating local land use codes, and how many of your members turn out to these meetings? Oftentimes not very many. And so you try and explain, you say, if you really care about protecting this place, you need to get involved in this planning process, or if you really care about water quality, this is your best opportunity. But it's harder because that sort of very tangible threat isn't there. So the way that we try and address it is, you have to do a lot of outreach and education, and it may not be as sort of fundamentally obvious, but once you sort of raise that kind of understanding about the opportunity that, say, a proactive planning process presents, and sort of build that capacity, it can enable you to get much greater participation.
Margo?
It's funny. It's actually kind of timely that in New Jersey, the DEP, that's our Department of Environmental Protection, and this actually, I'll go back to in parentheses here, the whole thing about being reactive, that can be a good initiator to get stuff going. I mean, it's hard to be proactive when you don't really have a cohesive base to begin with, which is kind of like why I've been doing all those crazy paddle journeys, is to at least get just to educate people and to hopefully connect them with groups that are in their local areas so that they can work together with them. Because a lot of times people don't realize that there's a problem. It's almost like an alcoholic with a 12-step problem or program. The first step of healing is like recognizing you have a problem. Maybe that's a wrong analogy to bring up. and this wonderful conference where we love fish and tend to sort of drink like them. But anyway. So the education has to be like the first step. And, it's actually kind of timely, I think, that New Jersey's deciding to take this very backward step because now, and I feel a little bit more armed, you know, also being a Surfrider member, with now how to possibly rally people together, and taking like Cindy Zip of Clean Ocean Action's whole model of now reaching out to fishermen, boaters who don't keep their boats at docks, because now we're going to have to probably fight for our access. So this is going to be a good way to at least build the relationships by reacting, so that in the future we will have a coalition so we can be proactive.
I would suggest be careful who you build a coalition with. I agree very much with the concept of reactive versus proactive. When you look around and look at member-driven organizations, unless the monster's clawing at the door, there's very little to drive membership. It's like if you have a clean ocean, it's like, well, of course it's going to be clean. And then it gradually degrades and you miss it. I look at, you know, I feel very unfortunate because the organizations, you're talking about organizations, you know, that speak for you on a policy level. Well, they don't speak for me. They really don't. And when I look at across the board at recreational fishing organizations, and I honestly don't believe they speak for the recreational angler either. And I was trying to get into that when talking before, that if you've got a trade association that's vested in tackle sales and also sales to commercial fishing, they have got very certain perspective on what they're doing. If you run a charter boat, you've got another very sure perspective on what you're doing. There are a lot of other side issues, and I really didn't want to get into some of the side issues right now, but the thing is that focus is not necessarily the focus of the recreational angler. When you take a look at something, it's very much like, you know, I constantly see these NRA-based campaigns. It's like they're taking your right to fish. You no longer have the freedom to fish, you know. You know, when it gets to, you know, pry my cold dead hand off my fishing rod, I'm looking for somebody else out there to represent me. And, you know, I love to fish, but again, getting back to it, I need a clean ocean. And I think that there are a number of groups across the United States in saltwater. There's some in freshwater that do this right now. The Fly Fisher Federation, there are a number that work really well. Cal Trout, Trout Unlimited, both do a fairly good job on this. Not perfect, but pretty good. And we need a voice like that in the saltwater also. And I think there are people working towards that right now.
Well, for us at Sailors for the Sea, initially it's just getting the word out there about who we are. Even within our own constituency, we're so new that 35,000 people participating doesn't exactly speak to the whole audience. It's so many more people out there. So just letting people know there's an organization has been a challenge. But what we've found is that broad-based messaging, again, works really well. Sailors, as a surfer, I can say it doesn't seem like surfing is naturally cohesive as a group, and sailors for years have always tended to group together into yacht clubs or sailing centers or community sailing centers, and that's actually something we've been able to use to our advantage to go out and work with them. And as a small group with a very small staff, but knowing that they're already grouped around the country, what we've been able to do is collaborate with other NGOs in the region to work on regional type of issues. And I can look out in the audience and see people here representing some of those organizations, and then we end up working with the local sailing community, and they might end up being participants within that regional planning process. We've also as ourselves worked with other NGOs, Surfrider amongst others, to be part of a process. Whether it might be the Mass Ocean Partnership is a good example. But for us, it's really been getting the word out there and then collaborating, because we're so small, to just leverage our initial entree into the policy discussion.
Anybody from the audience? Karen?
Yeah, I was really struck by the way you framed it as adventure. It's not just about adventure, or it's about more than
It's more than allocation.
No, adventure. You said it's more about, it's about adventure, not just about take.
Yeah.
Which I think is brilliant and really more true to my experience of fishing than it's not just about take, it's about access, which tends to make it an industry. That's, I think, you know, you're going in a whole new direction when you're emphasizing adventure. And it's much more, I think, it opens the door for more collaboration with non-fishing. So I think it's brilliant. You used it, let's spread that way of framing it. But I also have a question, and that is, your groups and ours are working well together to towards marine protected areas at the national level.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, a scientific study came out saying there are real impacts from sport fishing, and sport fishing industry moved to anger mode, and I think there was a freeze on relationships at the same time. And my question is, are we ever going to get over that? And how?
I think Freeze was putting it pretty nicely. It's very clear to me that the groups that that represent on a large scale marine sport fishing have taken a my way or the highway view on marine protected areas. They've used it to build membership, which they've done effectively. And I honestly don't think they've done a very good job of tackling the situation at hand. I mean, when you take a look across, the entire morning was devoted to, ecosystem-based management and marine spatial planning. It's very clear. Even before that, two things. One of my real heroes is Teddy Roosevelt, all right? And about 100 years ago, Teddy Roosevelt decided that they were going to stop shooting pelicans on Pelican Island, and with a stroke of a pen, changed it to basically a national wildlife area, protected area. He set up national parks across the United States, and what he did is he did a tremendous amount of protection. And that protection didn't simply eliminate fishing or hunting, but it did a very good job of putting it in perspective so that it could go on. Right now, the American citizen has the best access to the outdoors of any other citizen in the world, to my knowledge. Teddy Roosevelt wasn't reelected. Everybody goes, Roosevelt, great guy, conservation, absolutely. But understand that his own party basically divorced him, and he wasn't reelected. Okay, so he wasn't the tremendous conservation hero that he is today, and I think you have to take that into perspective. We've got some very good models on terrestrially how you manage resources. And when you take a look across the United States, I mean, there's going to be an incredible amount of people that are going, oh, I didn't do it right. But you know what? We've done it, and when you really look on a grand scale, we've done a fairly good job. Not perfect, but a fairly good job. It would be crazy not to recognize that these same types of management have to come to the ocean. We've got to do a better job on it. And right now, I think the leadership of sport fishing across the United States has done a very, very poor job of recognizing this, and they basically are leading their constituents in the wrong direction. I think it's incredibly important to put another couple voices up there so that those millions of people at least have a choice.
And what he said was that it ought to be about the adventure, right? And Pete also said, I think surfers ought to care more about the environment, and you said the same thing. And it makes me, well, the question to the panel is, what do you do when you start off broad-based and then you find that your constituency really has two very contrary positions? I saw the pie chart that Tom had up there of recreation, and we often see these different recreation interests start fighting each other or having opposing positions, and you kind of lose that collective bargaining power in the policy process against industry, bigger industries, other kinds of users. Is the only way to deal with, I see two ways of dealing with these constituencies that end up falling on two sides of the coin. One is to back off, right? And so a lot of boating organizations have to back off because their constituency is divided, or to create a new nonprofit to represent a smaller part of the group, which comes with its own issues. What do we do?
I'm going to jump back into this, and I want to answer a little bit more about adventure, and then I'll try and cover some of that. Karen, in particular, it is about adventure and not necessarily just about take. And what we're talking about is redefining success. And this gets back a little to, you know, how you segment industry. The recreational fishing industry has basically defined success as a limit of. And unfortunately, that limit of, it's a limit of fish filleted for the dock, a limit of fish brought back. And you know, kind of like you also take a close look at this, and a lot of that recreational caught fish actually gets out being either bartered or sold in the long run, and that's really not part of what we're doing. And you know, it's kind of like this little dark secret that nobody wants to talk about. But it does drive enough of the industry that you want to maintain that same definition of success. And I think clearly there are ways of changing the way we act by changing the goals that we look for. And again, this is getting back to the thing. How do we do that? We do that by changing the vision of success. And I think when you go across the board, there are a lot of different fishing groups around, but the thing is, if you can agree on a positive image on that, that success, whether it's catch and release or what it is, there are ways of doing that in a way that are beneficial to the ocean in particular.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to respond to that real quick, and I know there's a bunch of questions, but for us as a new organization, it's very interesting. We're looking around a lot, we're listening, we're discussing with a lot of folks within our own constituency, and you can see that there really, quite frankly, are going to be a divide on how that all shakes out, and that leads to some very interesting boardroom discussions for us about where we go and what we do in terms of strategic planning and as we go forward. I'd be happy to let you know. You'll soon find out, I think. But one of the things we've done in the short term is also funnel a lot of people within our constituency to other organizations. And we've worked really hard to do that and provide alternatives within our programs for people to engage with an organization that they feel is meaningful to them on some level. And maybe they're a sailor and a surfer and they go to Surfrider, or maybe they feel they want to do more policy work and they're over at NRDC or they're over at Oceana. And from our standpoint, as a policy within our organization, it's been very clear that a rising tide helps all of us. And so we may not get you as a member, but you start working within the ocean conservation community, and that makes us very happy. So we're happy on that front.
Okay, we're working. Hi, my name is Jeff Hofberger. I am the co-chairman of the South Jersey chapter of Surfrider. I'm also the South Jersey volunteer coordinator for Clean Ocean Action. I'm a first responder for the Marine Mammal Stranding Center. I sail. I recreational fish by boat and by beach. I paddle. I kayak. I surf. I dive. I swim. I live water. I would like to, before I get to the question of it, I'd like to give us an idea, and I've been thinking about this because of all these different things I've been doing since I was about yay big. I'd like to have help, with the help of you, form the Alliance of Recreational Ocean Users. Okay, and Margo's known me for years, and she knows I'm just nuts enough to do this. But let's get everybody together. In New Jersey, they have just passed a law where you have to enter the fishing registry. I don't know how many people here actually fish, but there is now a national fishing registry for saltwater users. New Jersey usurped that by saying, no, you won't have to pay the federal fee. Let's make our own. Bad idea. So you guys in Cali are putting millions of dollars into something that could be used for fishing conservation. It could educate people, hey, you know that line that comes off of your reels? Let's recycle it. I have fishing recycling bins all over Atlantic City and Brigantine, New Jersey. That gets sent back to Berkeley. The question is, how do you feel about getting an alliance together? Why can't we do this? And once this is finished, I would be happy to be one of the chairs of this, and let's get it happening. How do you folks feel about getting an alliance together?
Thumbs up or thumbs down?
This is just really funny because, and I'm emailing you right now because I emailed myself the same idea, and then I was talking with Mary, and she said, "Oh, well, you know, Helvar just mentioned that we ought to have something like that too," and I said, "Well, then let's do it."
I'm looking at the back row back there, April Wakeman, who's my partner in crime. About 2 years ago, we started putting together what we call the Sportfishing Conservation Alliance, where we try to bring in mainline conservation groups with recreational fishing groups. It's still kind of below the radar right now because we've got some big competition out there, but what I'm saying is a very good idea.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk after, yeah.
Let's go ahead with the next question before Dave Helvar comes in and kicks us out.
I guess this is working. My name's Suzanne Garrett. I guess my question is coming as a diver advocate. You had talked about, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. I'm horrible with names. Yes.
Dan.
But you had talked about working with the marine industry, I guess, you know, with the boats and, you know, all the various parts. And is this going to be just for sailing, or is it going to, you know, have an impact on the charter boats and the dive boats and, you know, the other sectors, I guess?
Oh, go ahead.
And then, you know, when y'all do this little recreational alliance, I'll come in for the divers.
Okay. Yeah, count us in on that alliance. And our vision for the Certified Sea Friendly program was strictly for recreational sail and power boats. We didn't have grander visions beyond that. That seemed like plenty.
Yes.
Well, I know we don't have a lot of time. I had a lot of questions to ask, but I'll try to keep it simple. My name's Trevor Mendelow. I run a youth education program called Teens for Oceans. We're out of Boulder, Colorado, and I work a lot with organizations like Trout Unlimited on creeks in Colorado. And I see the value of getting people out away from their TVs and getting out in the field and having some kind of meaningful field experience. But if you talk about education and you say to yourself, we want to educate people, I don't think putting kids in the field and getting exercise is really, I don't know whether you're educating people about the ecosystems that they're in unless you really make that effort. And if you take a look at some of the big sport that you talked about, the big sport fishing groups like the IGFA, I mean, they're supporting an industry that's creating having a tremendously deleterious environmental effect with boat usage and anchoring and trash. And kids ask me all the time, when I go in the field with them, they say, "Can we fish, Mr. Mendelow?" And I say, "Not in front of me. I think it's barbaric, personally. But that's just my opinion." And I tell them, if you like the adventure of fishing, that's fine. It's something that if you like that, but it is just that. It's just an adventure, and I think labeling it as education is dishonest, a little bit disingenuous with the kids I work with. I'm not sure. I just thought. So my question is, how do you not paint anglers with one brush? It seems as though you really have to make an effort to distinguish between the types of recreational fishing, so that people can understand it.
I'm not exactly sure. You know, when I fish in Santa Barbara, and I'm not the first one to fish there. The history starts with the Chumash about 12,000 years ago. And there's a strong tradition that goes on down the line. And I don't, you know, I'm proud to be part of that tradition. Now, I treat resources a little bit differently than they do because, you know, I found a different way to make a living and feed myself. But the thing is, there's a strong tradition there. And I think it's part of, you know, this is not it's a learned trait maybe, or maybe it's just something cultural. But, you know, I think there's a strong tradition of fishery. I don't know if I'm not sure that answers your question, but it's probably as close as I can get to it.
No, but it makes me think, I mean, when you tell kids that you think fishing is barbaric, do you think of that as education, or as some, you know, how do you draw that line too? So it's really tricky what we consider education, what we consider to be our values that we're trying to get people to adopt. And I think one of the things that you can do when you're in the field that you can't do otherwise is you say, well, you caught that fish. Now, do you know why we might not be able to catch that fish next year? So are we out of time?
We're being told we're out of time.
Oh, your day is okay. Well, thank you. Thanks everybody for attending, and thank you to our panelists.